another hearing aid in.
So there, I'd grown up together with Ellie, and he's friends with your grandson, and that's how we made this connection.
Aren't the family, as I recall, that had, I forget their name. I think they started in the lumber business and got into real estate.
Ratner.
The Ratners, yeah, they were friends of ours too.
Uh-huh.
And then another reason many of them are friends, we've served together on different national boards.
Oh.
Hebrew Union College, the National Jewish Welfare Board. I was international president of community centers, and we established centers.
So Mandel has...
He took my place.
Oh, yeah?
He came after I did. And now his wife, Barbara, is more active with the Hebrew Union, with the Hebrew University. She's chairman, or was, I don't know if she is right now, was chairman of the Friends of the, American Friends of the Hebrew University. And also she became active there, while Mart was more interested in the community center movement. She got interested in the university. I remember when they started their first store, and I bought stock when they went public. I bought stock in their company.
What was it called? It was...
I forget. Yeah, became a large company, started with just a small store there.
Premier...
What's that?
No, maybe not. Premier... I forget what
Yeah, Premier Enterprises or something of that sort. Yeah. And even though Mart was the younger of the brothers, he really ran it more than the others. One of them, I remember, spent most of his time playing bridge. He was a great bridge player, one of the brothers.
Okay. Well, we're doing this interview on behalf of Toldos Israel is the name of the organization. And I'm Eric Halivni. I'm sitting here with Mr. Isadore Erwin Millstone, i.e. Millstone, in St. Louis, Missouri, or in Clayton, Missouri. And why don't you tell me a little bit about your family life growing up, and start.
Well, I have, of course, great nostalgia for my early days in St. Louis because I was born here. My father had come from Latvia as a student, and his family already were living in St. Louis and in business here. So I had the great privilege of living in a wonderful city that at that time was the fourth largest city in America, the first place where a rail went across the Mississippi River when they built the Eads Bridge here. And for some reason or other, my father had become connected when he got married with the United Hebrew Temple, which was founded in 1836 and was one of the first Reform congregations in the United States. And as a result, I was raised in a non-Jewish community because my father attended Washington University, became an engineer, and worked for the St. Louis Car Company, because at that time all the streetcars in America were manufactured in St. Louis. It was a huge business. So we lived on Adelaide Avenue, which is in North St. Louis, because it was close to the plant there. But in those days, there were no automobiles yet. They were just starting to come, and they were primitive. So either you walked or you went on the streetcar. So, and my grandparents lived in the Jewish quarter of St. Louis, which was in the downtown part of St. Louis. So when we would visit there, I would go on the streetcar, and there was a cute story that my mother used to tell, that in order to buy meat, kosher meat, she would go down to the Jewish quarter in downtown St. Louis, and it was a very long streetcar ride. And then one day she didn't tell my father, but she decided she wasn't going to take that long ride, so she bought in a local grocery store, and as she said, the roof didn't fall in, nothing happened, so she didn't make those long rides down to the area close to the downtown district that was predominantly the Jewish quarter, but not entirely. There was also Irish quarters right close by. All immigrants, of course, all new immigrants from the Civil War on in that area. There was Italian areas. Many of the people only spoke their language, many either Italian or Yiddish. Many of them spoke Yiddish. Yiddish was, my father never had an accent. I don't know why, and Yiddish was never spoken or used in our house. I hadn't even heard it except when I would go down to visit my grandparents, and also an aunt. I also had an aunt. So in 1904, the World's Fair was in St. Louis, which was a big event. And the St. Louis Car Company, there was a financial panic about that time. So my father was out of a job, and he moved to what was the West End. That was the new part of the city that was developing around the World's Fair area, which was around Kings Highway. So he needed a job, and he was a member of the United Hebrew Temple, and they had just purchased a church that they had converted into a temple, a synagogue, and the rabbi at that time was Rabbi Messing, who had first become rabbi, I think, in 1875 or 1876, but he died in 1913. It was a small congregation of about 200 members, and the church had a house next door to it, 5014 Von Versen, and it had a lovely yard, and we moved into that house. As a result of that, there were very, very few Jews who had moved that far west because the city at that time barely went beyond Grand Avenue, and this was way farther west. And they had just opened new city schools, which were great in those days because there were no private schools yet at that time. So everybody, all the children went to the public schools. And my sister was a teacher in the public schools. And later on, my wife, when we got married, she was a teacher in the city schools. But oddly, the city schools, the St. Louis city schools didn't permit married teachers. If you were married, you couldn't be a teacher. So this became ridiculous. When they got married, they'd have to lose their jobs, and at this particular time, and I'm jumping ahead of myself, the stock market had crashed in 1929, and frankly, we really could have used the income from those. I think I got paid $95 a month in those days, but inflation is about 30 times there, so that'd be like anyway, 30 times that. So anyway, they did get jobs as substitutes in the county schools, and they would pay them by the day. But as for myself, the city opened Clark School in 1912, and I started kindergarten in 1912 at Clark School, and then St. Louis, and then Soldan High School opened about that time. And when I graduated from Clark School, I started Soldan High School. Now what's interesting about that is the fact that this was now the West End. Very, very few Jews there, maybe 1-2% at the most. But all of the heads of the major corporations in St. Louis, and at that time, St. Louis was 4th or 5th in this country in heads of national corporations and manufacturing and distribution centers. So I got to know, as my classmates, I got to know and grew up, let's say, with the wealthiest and most prominent non-Jewish families in St. Louis because of going to school with them and becoming friends. And later on, of course, they in turn headed up these major corporations because they also would be over 100 years today. So it would be their grandchildren that would be heading up those companies today if they were still here. Unfortunately, most of those companies have left St. Louis and they are not here. So the economy is entirely different today than it was at that time. But it was a very prominent, prosperous area because the first railroads came across the East Bridge, and that opened up the gateway to the west, and it became a great distribution center for almost everything: shoes, dresses, and as new immigrants came in, many of the Jews got into these particular industries of shoes and dresses, and some of the metals were sometimes starting as peddlers, but becoming large companies like Lewin, New York listed companies, as a matter of fact, as they grew later on. So St. Louis grew.
Did you have any Jewish education, formal or informal, or?
I had, in those days, in the Reform movement, and St. Louis was mainly a German Jewish community. The older population that was here were practically all German Jews. So the other Reform congregations, and there were a total of 5, were practically all German Jews. So they all belonged to congregations. There was Sheremoth and Temple Israel and B'nai El, as well as United Hebrew Temple. And I would say that practically all of the Jewish children did attend what we called religious school or Sunday school. But it was one day a week. It was one day a week, usually Saturday. And we did not study Hebrew. I was never bar mitzvah at 13. I was confirmed at 15. We were confirmed. And so we did study, and in fact I even taught at the United Hebrew Temple. I taught religious school there while I was a student at Washington U, and shortly afterwards I was a teacher there. So we did have to know a certain amount about the holidays and about the history, but what you'd call a good Jewish education today did not exist at that time in the Reform movement. I'm sure that it did in the Orthodox community. I'm sure that it did. And there were a lot of Orthodox, small Orthodox congregations on almost every corner there were so many of them. Eventually, there were fewer and fewer, but originally, if there was a minion, they had a congregation. And their children would wear a yarmulke, which we did not. We did not wear a shawl in congregation. Some of the Reformed congregations didn't even use Hebrew even in the services. Today, of course, all of them have become more religiously involved and interested, and it kind of surprises me in some cases because, of course, intermarriage has now occurred between the new immigrants, Eastern European Europe, either from Poland or Russia or Latvia, Romania, with the German Jewish boys and girls as they met in college. And in St. Louis, college at that time mainly meant Washington University. It has always been very receptive to Jewish students, even at a time when there was quotas. If we wanted to go to Princeton or Harvard or to Yale or to Brown, there were very low quotas, maybe 1-2%, whatever it might be. It was not easy to get in, and it was expensive, of course, compared to Washington University. When I started Washington University, I paid $200 a year tuition. Now I think it's closer to $50,000, and it's now, of course, become one of the top 8-10 universities in America. So basically, when you asked about life was so simple because of the fact that we either walked or went on the streetcars. And when we went on the streetcars, at the end of every streetcar line was an amusement park. There'd be a dance floor, there'd be circle swings, there would be a swimming pool, so you could pay 5 cents. And they did that to develop business for the streetcars. So we loved to go to the end of the streetcar lines, which were pretty long distances, and spend the day out there that way. Also, being on the river and being no air conditioning in those days, you had to get out of the house. It was just, we'd have, St. Louis is blessed. It has 4 very distinct seasons. We have cold winters, we have hot summers, we have beautiful springs, beautiful falls and all. So there would be some activities that you'd participate in, whether it was ice skating or using our sleds on the hill in the wintertime, or going to the swimming pools, which were many of them, or going out to the Merrimack River, where my parents had a cottage. They had a cottage out on the river where we'd spend the summertime and all. And we all had our own canoes out there. So with the friends that I had, and I happened to be a good athlete also, so I played on most teams. I played, and because I had become a very proficient swimmer, I became a lifeguard during the summertime and made $90 a month for 3 months. That was $270, and only $200 of it was required for full year's tuition at Washington U. So I still had surplus money after a summer's work as a lifeguard. So that gave me other friends who also were lifeguards there. A few of them Jewish, most of them not. So between sports and this activities in school and after school of playing together in the neighborhoods, it was a wonderful youth time. It was just, I can't imagine a better one, but it was very, very simple. There were no supermarkets, so everything was cooked at home, and you did your chores. I was one of four. I had two brothers and a sister, so we all took our turns doing what we had to do around the house, because there was plenty to do in those days. They burned soft coal because Illinois had a lot of soft coal, so the furnaces burned soft coal. It wasn't even in furnaces to begin, it was in fireplaces. Every room had a fireplace, and electricity was just coming in. A lot of the chandeliers still had gas. They were just starting to add one electric bulb in a chandelier, and the neighborhood, the lighting man who would come around to light the lamps, we would follow him around while he would light the gas lights, and also the delivery. They would deliver. We had ice boxes, so we'd put a 25 pounds, 50 pounds, and the iceman would deliver. The milkman would deliver the milk at the front door. It was watermelon time. The watermelon would come around. So, and the stores, there were no such things as superstores at all. Either you went to the hardware store, or you went to the bakery, or you went to the butcher shop, or you went to whatever they were. And every neighborhood in St. Louis had its own shopping center. And the owners of a lot of these local stores were Jews, many of them, not only in the West End, which became Jewish, but in the non-Jewish areas as well, many of the stores. One of my uncles had 2, 3 shoe stores in different parts of the city. So.
Do you remember the first time that, or did anybody talk about Zionism or Palestine or anything while you were growing up in your house or in the temple? Or?
Well, let me put it this way. To begin with, the first time as a young boy that I was even aware there was Palestine would be because into our neighborhood would come a man in a long black coat, whatever it is, soliciting. He would be coming around the neighborhood, and some of the families still had a box, for money for, what's that?
Tzedakah or
no,
charity?
Yeah, but what do they call the box? They call it anyway, to put coins in for Palestine and all. Some of the houses did have those, and I would see these men come in. I didn't know if they were rabbis or what, but they'd come around soliciting. They'd see my father, who now was the executive secretary of the United Hebrew Temple when we moved next door, and he held that job until he died. He held it 40 years, from 1900 till he died in the year before Israel was formed.
47?
He died in 1947 at the age of 64 from a heart attack. But he held that job there, and the only other help at that time was the rabbi, who was Rabbi Messing at that time, and then Rabbi Samuel Thurman, who held that job for another 30, 40 years. And I would do chores, and we lived right next door, and later on, they put an addition on the temple which today would be a community center, but in those days, in the name of the joint, they called it Harburger Hall, and they would have weddings and dances and parties and all, and they used the backyard of our house to build what was Harburger Hall. So to answer your question, I would say early on, up to the time that Mr. Golland, who was my father-in-law, was one of the founders of Metropolitan Life Insurance Company in, I don't know, 1880 or somewhere back in there. And they were a small company and they were expanding. So he, around 1903 or 4, he moved to Kansas City and opened an office for Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. Then he moved to St. Louis about 1911 or 12, opened an office in St. Louis. He liked St. Louis and remained here. His son, Joshua Golland, married my sister Cecilia, who was 2 years older than I. And then I married my brother-in-law's sister, Goldie Golland, in 1930. We were married. Now, this was a new experience because even though Mr. Golland was active in very active in the general community and insurance, there used to be very large dinners giving in his honor by the mayor and all in St. Louis. Nevertheless, he was a Zionist, and he had come as a young boy also from Latvia, Riga. He came, I think, from Riga. And he knew the originators of the concept, the very concept. When you see those names, he was friendly with them and he knew them. And when even before I married Goldie, and I would visit my sister and brother-in-law there, he would tell me, Isadore, he would say, someday there is going to be a Jewish state in Palestine. And one of the first things that will be required will be a great university. So he was one of the founders of the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus in 1926. And he set up a charitable foundation, one of the early foundations here, called the Berwitz-Golland. His wife's name was Berwitz, his was Golland. It was the Berwitz-Golland Foundation. And we have, from then to this day, we have sent students to the Hebrew University when it was only on Mount Scopus. So that was one of my first contacts with Palestine, or the concept of a Jewish state. Now, I won't say that my father was anti, but much of the German Jewish community in St. Louis was literally anti, even had an organization, anti-Palestine or Israel, even. So here it was interesting for me as a young man. I was now maybe 16, 17, hearing two great men that were both scholars. They were both very brilliant men. Mr. Golland and my father both are well known for their contributions. But here was a head of a Reformed congregation. When I say head of it, he literally ran it. He was head of the the religious school. He was principal of the religious school. He was Boy Scouts master for the scout troop. And of course, I participated with them in those things when they would have activities. That would be part of my life. Now I'm hearing the other side of the idea of a Jewish state. And even though Mr. Golland had come from a Orthodox family, he joined, and he belonged to joined a conservative, B'nai Munah, a conservative. He also belonged to the United Hebrew Temple, which is Reformed, because of our family connection and all. So that was really my first hearing the story of why there should be and why there probably would be and what it would take to establish a Jewish state. And that was about 1926. And I can give you, if you want me, some of the original correspondence and news articles of the establishment of the foundation and so forth. I have it in my files, if you want to see any of that.
As a result of that, were there some of the Zionist leaders, did they come through St. Louis?
Yes, a lot of them became friends and headed up the Zionist organization of St. Louis. A good friend of mine, Al Fleischman, became president of it, and some of our social friends through was a professor at St. Louis University of all places, Catholic University. I'll think of his name in a minute. His brother was a professor at the Hebrew University and lived in Palestine, and he was a professor. Professor Klausner was a very good friend of Mr. Golland, and Mr. Golland, I'll show you, signed up 1,000 members for the Zionist organization and collected the $6 required personally. Shows what a salesman is. And he would not take the $6 unless they first would listen to him as why they should belong to the Zionist Party. And I'll give you the literature showing you that they had never heard in New York, or they have never heard anybody who ever had done any such thing as that. But Mr. Golland did that. That's how convinced he was that there would be a state and it would need local support, local members and all. And many of the very prominent people did become members of the Zionist organization because of him.
Did any of the leaders from Palestine come through St. Louis to visit?
There were, yes. Yes, they did on occasion. They would come and they'd visit Mr. Golland. I forget the names of some of them. They did, yes. In fact, I've got the letterheads of some of who the people were, both locally and nationally, because he worked nationally as well as locally. So I've got the letter with Warburg, for instance, Warburg on the national at that time, so forth.
When did you start to become involved yourself in?
My main interests, I graduated from Washington University in 1927 with an engineering degree and an architectural engineering degree. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an architect or an engineer. The family all discouraged it, not my mother or father, but uncles, aunts, friends. They would say, why would a young, bright Jewish boy want to be an engineer and you probably end up making $100 a month as a surveyor on the railroad. That's the way they visualized engineering in those days. When he can be a lawyer or he can be a doctor, why in the world they tried to discourage me from doing it? But a number of my friends, parents, fathers and all, were active and already owned quarries, already were big in construction, and I liked that. That appealed to me. So every subject that I studied in high school, at Solon High School, even before I went to Washington U, were the science courses and the courses that would lead up to, I probably neglected the arts or languages and so forth that I should have been studying. But it's hard work and it takes a lot of time. And frankly, I was enjoying myself. I had girlfriends and dates. So I was having a great bringing up, a great early time. And as I said, we had no computers, we had no airplanes at the time. We got our first automobile, I think, in 1914, which was very early for automobile. We had a horse and buggy before that. So life was so simple. And as I said, when it was time to prepare a meal, I would go to the store to buy something. We would always have fish on Thursday because it was a great Catholic neighborhood. My mother knew that the Catholics all had fish on Friday. They would have fish, but they brought in the fish, from wherever it came from. So she figured it was fresh on Thursday. So I would always go to the store and buy fish on Thursday. So that was usually a diet item. And otherwise, as I said, we bought from the local stores. Life was very simple. People today don't realize what it means just to walk any place you wanted to go, and we did a lot of walking, or put 5 cents, and the railroads, the streetcars were every corner. You didn't have to go far like light rail today to go to get it. It was on the corner, and I wouldn't hesitate to get in and go to a swimming pool by myself when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, or go visit family on the streetcar. They were safe and all. So here was a very simple life. No television. They were just starting to have radio at that time, just starting. It was mostly keyboard type thing. So those were wonderful days while I was in school and got to know girls and became a good athlete. I was elected to the Sports Hall of Fame. But I also, the Olympics were coming up. When I was a senior, none of the colleges had 10-meter boards. We had springboards and all, and they weren't very lively. So I switched from springboard to platform diving, and they had a meet with the Olympics coming up, and I was doing a dive. And dives in those days weren't like they are today. The complications of somersaults plus twists plus all that, they were very simple dives by comparison. But anyway, I overcast, I got a whiplash, and I injured my back, which I've suffered with ever since. So anyway, I don't know if that tells you about what life was like here in St. Louis. And as I say, the seasons were so wonderful because we got advantage of ice skating and sledding. And my parents did too, by the way. They loved the outdoors, so they indulged right along with us with ice skating and swimming and all. They were very proficient
when did you yourself start to become involved in Zionism or supporting activities in Palestine or anything of that sort?
All right. I would put it this way. The St. Louis had a YMHA, Young Men's Christian Association, like you have in Cleveland too. And it was established, it's 125 years old. Okay. So there was one built out west near our house. So I became a member of it. In the membership of the J, as we call it, even though they had no formal Jewish education, in fact, the rabbis would have objected seriously if they did, but there was a Jewish aspect. First of all, there were Orthodox who were members as well as Reform. So I got to know now more of Orthodox or conservative. St. Louis had a big conservative group and all, who did pay more attention to religion than I had grown up with. They were all bar mitzvah. All of them had a bar mitzvah, and I never had one, or a bat mitzvah. So I became, and the J had certain programs that involved Jewish content, let's say. So since this was a Jewish institution, whatever it is, I became interested, and eventually through the J movement, I became president of the National Jewish Welfare Board. And then when we went international, I was on the Claims Commission. When we got money in Europe with Nahum Goldman, some money we got for Israel, which they used, I think you know, for the new port or a railroad. And I was, when we received our share, which was for institutions that had been taken, it was some hundred. I think Israel got about $1 billion and we got about 150 million. So I went and opened up community centers in Paris and Brussels. They didn't want them in England because England is peculiar. They have boys' clubs and all, and they're paid for by the government. So they, and in new Jewish neighborhoods, they're Jewish, but they're still paid by the government. They didn't need the capital to build them and so forth. Now, through this movement, I now became involved with Zionism. Zionism did become a factor early on with the Wise and so forth. So, and especially when I would go to open up a center in Paris or in Brussels, where the head was Goldman, Robert Goldman, I think his name, headed up for the Jewish, not the Jewish National Fund, was the, I forget, it was really the
world.
Yeah, the world, he was represented them.
Nahum Goldman.
Yes, correct. And he wanted a content of Zionism in these centers and so very anxious to have that in. And it became a major, so I became now more acquainted with Zionists, and the center movement at that time, especially in Europe, was very much interested also. And that wasn't easy in France. In France, when we would talk Zionism, and even in England, they weren't anxious to have that as part of the program or whatever it is. The irony of this thing is that when we were building and these were beautiful big centers, you know, and money was coming from the reparations. Money was coming from reparations, 150 million. They weren't being used because the French Jews were not Zionist inclined at all. They didn't even, if you even talked about it, and I'd get some of the local people together to operate, to run and be involved with this center, they had very, very little interest. So they were after these beautiful, and I remember the one in Antwerp, that was a different condition. That was just the opposite. There, they were so religious in Antwerp, the Jews were so orthodox and all, that they wouldn't even use it because it didn't have a kosher kitchen and it didn't have, they wouldn't even use the building. And most of the community in Antwerp were Orthodox Zionist Jews, and very wealthy, by the way, because they were in the diamond trade, and a lot of them were very wealthy, very wealthy. But all of a sudden what happened, so the centers were there practically empty, and now they had riots in North Africa, in
Morocco or?
no, not Morocco, or not at that time. In what's one other North American big?
Libya or?
No. It's part of France. It was part of France.
Oh.
Yeah, it was part. They were French citizens. Anyway, anyway. There were riots in North Africa so 500,000 Jews with French citizenship moved to France, and most of them to Paris. They filled up the community centers that were empty overnight. The next time I visited, these were all not French Jews at all. These were all African, Sephardic, basically Jews that came now to who became citizens. I mean, they were citizens of France, but they moved to France. So that happened about at that time. So now. I'm ahead of myself to the point where the state of Israel did exist now.
Let me take you back. Let me ask you.
This now they did exist now at this time, and that's why the reparations. We got the reparations because of some went to Israel and some went here. So now I'm getting up ahead. So if we want to talk,
let me take you a step back and see if leading up to the founding of the state.
Yeah.
Do you remember where you were or anything about November 29th, 1947, when the UN vote to partition Palestine?
Oh, yes. I was very, very much involved with that because President Truman, who was from Missouri, and our Rabbi Thurman were close friends like this because they both were Masonic, belonged to the Masonic order in a big way. They were both. So, President, who I just mentioned him? Truman was a little judge in Kansas City, and we were large contractors by this time. By this time, we were building highways. We built all the public housing projects in St. Louis, most of them in Florida. We had an office there. We did a lot of That's how Ben-Gurion happened to call me, because we were building thousands of housing units at that time. And all. We do highways, bridges, office buildings. We built Bush Stadium, but we also did housing at that time. We had housing offices almost all over the country, building 5,000, 10,000 housing units in each city. So we're a lot of, we were building more housing units than who did the towns. What was his name? Who built the housing towns? Anyway, whatever it would be. So anyway.
So now we're talking about November, we're talking about the UN vote
Okay.
and leading up.
Oh, yes. Now, I was very much involved in that personally, because some of the activities occurred right in our house. Here's how it happened. One of my classmates in Washington was Clark Clifford.
Really?
He was one of my classmates, and he had become an attorney. And he had gone to Washington, had left and gone to Washington. One of my fellow lifeguards at Fairground Park was Bob Hannigan, was Robert Hannigan, and all. And the big politician in Kansas City was Prendergast. He was a big politician. You couldn't do anything or even bid on a job without consulting with Prendergast. And he also had his own ready-mix concrete plant that you had to buy from if you did work there. Truman was his buddy, and he's the one who had made him a judge. And then, of course, you know about his partner, Jewish. Jacobson was his partner, but Truman really had nothing to do with it. I don't know how they got involved. Jacobson, it was his store and so forth.
Did you know Jacobson?
What's that?
Did you know Jacobson?
Very little. I met him once or twice and all. But this is all very interesting now. Now you've hit a key point here. So the people that I just mentioned here are the ones who made Truman both senator and president. They're the ones who did. And some of the activities was right in our house because my father. So anyway, since our Rabbi Thurman and Rabbi of United Hebrew Temple, Thurman and Truman were close friends in the Masonic order, they would see each other, and our house was right next to the temple and so forth. So I got to know him from their mutual friendship. When Truman had become a senator, and there were friends, including Prendergast still at the time, and Bob Hannigan and these others, who were all friends, wanted him to run for president or become president, or what was it, vice president first? I forget how it worked. But anyway, they would get together and talk about how they were going to accomplish this thing. Both Bob had. As a result of this, when Truman became president, he had Rabbi Thurman induct him. It was the first time a rabbi has ever inducted. So he had his good friend and Rabbi Thurman come and induct him. And he made Bob Hannigan, who was one of the group, Postmaster General. And Clark Clifford became advisor to him. This is where it all developed, right in our house, so to speak, because of Rabbi Thurman. Really, because of that was the connection. That was a connection, but it was a strong one. Now, when you ask about those times, then what happened after that, some of it wasn't too nice. Some of it was not too nice. When Israel wanted to become a state, well, it was not yet a state and all, the Zionists of the world, started to, Truman was now president. He now had become president. And the Zionists world started to bother him, literally. And he told Rabbi Thurman, I don't ever want to see another Jew. I don't want to see another Jew. Just keep them off of my back. We have a war on our hands. We have plenty of problems here, and they are just pestering me here about a Jewish state, about a Jewish state, and all. So it was getting, and even Jacobson wouldn't talk to him or approach him. Even John wouldn't approach him. So let me see if I can identify now exactly what the procedures were. So it was getting very, very difficult, even impossible to approach him. And Weitzman now got into the act. He wanted an appointment with Truman, and he couldn't get it. Finally, let me see just how it happened. Finally, Clark Clifford got into the act. Jacobson, not much. They tried a little bit, but I'm trying to think exactly how. One of them convinced Truman that he should see Weitzman, and he did. And he did see him. I gave him, I forget who gave him the story of what he had done in World War I which is well known and so forth. And Weitzman hit it off with Truman. He hit it off with Truman okay. And basically, when his approval was required to recognize the state, that's about how it came about. That's about how it actually came. Through these people and these connections.
Clifford was invited to present the case to Truman. I think there was.
Right, yeah. Clark got involved. Clifford, a very close friend of mine. And he got involved in it, and as I remember, he convinced Weitzman when nobody else really could, and they had it, and Weitzman evidently had the personality.
You want to just ask him again about the Truman thing? You forgot.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to touch it. I'm good.
No?
Go ahead.
So do you remember following these events when they were taking place? The UN vote to partition Palestine, and then
I certainly was.
Leading up to the.
I was on pins and needles for the interest, of course, of a state there, and by that time also we had more family already there. Some of our family from South Africa had left, didn't see a future in South Africa after the policy of apartheid, whatever it is. So they moved to Israel. Also, when Hitler, when Hitler went into Latvia, all of our family were killed. That's my mother's family. My father's family already were here in St. Louis, but my mother's family, when Hitler went into Latvia there, my mother's maiden name was Apter, A-P-T-E-R, and they were a wealthy family there. Even earlier, in 1918, the Bolsheviks killed 2, 3 of my mother's brothers and sisters. Their own servants killed them, you know. And I remember I was a little boy at the time, that was 1917 or 18 and all. And here we were now, after the Bolsheviks took over, we were sending food packages and clothing things and things that this very well-to-do family, I can show you some of that correspondence too, over there. So that was already in 17 or 18 that they went through that. Then it was 1942 that Hitler, that the Germans went through Latvia and all and killed everybody except one of my mother's nieces. One of my mother's nieces escaped. How, I don't know. And she ended up near a big country, big state in Russia, a big city in Russia.
St. Petersburg, or?
No, not St. Petersburg.
Moscow?
Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
She ended up near Moscow with a young son. The only ones, right? The rest, Natham Apter, and then my grandfather's sister had married a man by the name Leviton, who also, her son went to Palestine in 1926. He died 2-3 years ago at the age of 104. And the early story of him in Palestine at that is interesting. And his house was the first house built in Holon, and it has a brass pattern on it, Leviton's home. You know, and they, of course, have a lot of children now that I hear from constantly. They call me all the time. They're a lovely family, the Leviton family, a lovely family that have remained in Israel all of this time. Now that Leviton that's there is only there because my grandfather's sister's son had gone there as a pioneer, and he raised that family. Now, my mother's brothers and sisters and all had 3 of them had emigrated to South Africa. They were in the Boer War. That's how early they were there. They became very prominent, very well-to-do family in South Africa. They've ended up in Israel also now. They see no future, so some have gone to Australia and some are in Israel. That's how they got there. One of them's head of the department at the Children's Hospital, Children's, in fact, I have a letter laying on my desk right now I just received from him. He's head of the children's psychiatry at the Children's Hospital there. They came from South Africa. The girl with the young baby that was in Moscow, while she was there, she met a Polish, her husband, her brother, and her husband had been killed by the Nazis when they came into Latvia. They'd killed them. She, as far as I know, she's the only one really that got out. And all. It was a large family. So she met a man Gelbard, a Dr. Gelbard, a Polish man, met him. They got married, and because he was a Pole, the Russians let him leave. Otherwise, they never could have left. Because he was a Pole, they were like, and they found their way to Israel, to Israel. When I was in Israel, either the first or second time, my mother had received letters. She hadn't heard from her for a long, long time. She says, I don't know if this is true, if it's really Masha. If it's really Masha, she said, but I have a letter that she and her daughter and grandson now were in Nahariya. They had gotten there, and they had sent them to Nahariya. You know, they were trying to spread the people and get them away from Haifa and Tel Aviv. So they had sent them to Nahariya, which is a lovely town, as you know there. So, and she wrote to my mother that she needed enough money to buy 2 apartments, one for herself and one for her daughter, whose daughter had now got married now. So she asked me on either my first or second trip there, I forget which, to go visit her and find out whether this is really her family that she's hearing from. So Ben-Gurion gave me a car and a guide and somebody who spoke both Russian and Yiddish, So we went up to Nahariya, and by the way, my mother didn't hesitate. She sent the money. So money was already there. So when we got there, they already had the 2 apartments, very lovely apartments. They already had them. So anyway, I have the address, and I knock on the door, and here's this little lady who was a grandma now. She looks at me and she says, Isadore. She says, Isadore. She, evidently from pictures that had been sent, she recognized me, so Isadore. So, and my guide, I forget, a very nice man that Ben-Gurion gave to me to go, and a car and a driver, and they were speaking Yiddish. And maybe some Hebrew, maybe some Russian, I don't know either. And they hit it off, and they were talking about everything, and she was telling them, I was in between here. So that's how that family, she has died. Her daughter is now not well at all. She's 86, and her son, Reuven Gelbard, just visited me last week in St. Louis. He was here to see me because he knew I wasn't well. And he was also here on my birthday was January 6th. He was here also for my birthday. He is, I think, 60 now. He is 60 now. And he was in every war, of course, in all the war, an officer. He graduated from the Technion, and he was in the design department of the Air Corps. That's where he worked. But in the 73 war, or 67 war, I don't know, it was on the Golan. What war would have been?
73.
73, yeah, he was injured badly, and he was in a hospital for about 2 years recovering and so forth. So he is really not well even now. So those were the Zionist other connections you asked about,
right,
of the family there.
Let's talk about after the founding of the State of Israel.
Yes.
You received a call, or were contacted by?
Yes. When the state was established, Ben-Gurion was looking to the Jews of the world to come help him. We now have a state. Here's was his story. We now have a state and all. We've been fighting the British for all these years, and I can tell you some stories about some of those fights too, because they were involved with those, because they were, and especially somebody there since 1926 and all, and these are, active people, men. So, and some of the stories can be told, some of them can't be told, because people were now coming to see me, sent by certain emissaries to get money, frankly, for guns, planes, anything. And we raised it for them. We got it under one pretext or another. So I was pretty familiar with this already.
Was this connected to Rudolph Sonneborn? Or
I don't remember the names of the men that would come and so forth, but even Golda was aware of it. Golda was aware of where that money was going. She became a good friend of mine because of the housing. They used to call me Golda's boyfriend. And my wife's name was Goldie. So anyway, that was going on before. That was going on in the period when they were fighting the British. Those incidents of what they needed and who could go there, would be willing to go, and mainly money to buy and get access, and also find somebody to get access to certain things that they weren't supposed to ship, whatever it would be. So anyway, that period now was over. And that included this bombing of the King David there. That was part of that also, and so forth. So anyway, now it's a state. And Ben-Gurion says, I need help here. I need help. And he asked other people, I don't know who they're, to do certain chores or to come or to do things. I don't know what they were. But as far as I'm concerned, and all of what you'll see in our files and all, was that he calls and he says that I've heard that you're a big builder of houses, which we were. Most of them were public. We did some subdivisions and some individual mansions for friends and all, but basically I wasn't interested in housing. But the first public housing project let in the United States was given to St. Petersburg, Florida, because Senator Claude Pepper was chairman of the Senate Housing Committee. So out of respect to him, they gave the first one in 1935 or 36. We didn't have any in St. Louis yet. The first one he gave to him. There were no airplanes at the time. I didn't even know where Florida was, but it was 500 units, and they added 500 more later, 1,000 units in St. Pete, and all. Very nice houses and all. And we put in a bid, and we were the low bidder. So now I've got to get down to Florida, pass their exam, and they didn't want any believe you me, the Ku Klux Klan was active down there, and they didn't want any Northerners down there, especially any Jews down in that area. And neither did the local contractors in Tampa and in Jacksonville, where the biggest contractors were. But it wasn't easy at that time to get a bond on jobs that size. We were bondable, and you had to furnish a bond, and you had to qualify to do it. So I personally went on the train 2 days and a night. After we're low bidder, I'd go down there to meet the local people, the architects and local people. I personally took the exam as a contractor, which they had a big room. that was in another city. I had to go to take that. So I took that exam, and then in order to put your seal on the plans, you had to have either an architect or an engineer's seal to go on the plans that had to be filed down there. So you had to qualify for that. So I qualified for that, got my seal, put the seal on the plans. And now I had to get our bonding company to go down there and sign the bond, because for them, this was one of the largest contracts ever let in Florida. This was a big deal. This was Depression years, don't forget. It was Depression time. I'm talking about 1935, 36. This is the bottom of the Depression. This was a big project so far. Anyway, we did what had to be done, and we did that one. Then they let one in St. Louis and followed up with 4, 5, 6 other ones of 1,000 units. One of them, the famous or infamous now, Pruitt-Igoe, 4,000 units. And we bid them all. We were low bidder on all of them. We built them all. And then we also opened up an office in, the next one in Florida was in where the big play, you know, the big, forget it. People go to see the park, the big,
Orlando?
Orlando, yeah. And we built a 500 unit in Orlando and around Florida. Okay. So.
Ben-Gurion has heard about all of these projects.
Okay. He heard about me. He also heard about the attorney, whatever his name is, who at that time was head of the houses, of the federal housing system. He said. Anyway, he'd heard about him, and he says, we have a problem here. And you just remember that you couldn't fly across the ocean at that time. There were no flights across the ocean. And this was on, I don't know, let's say it was like on a Monday or whatever it would be. And he says, we need fast action because we've opened the gates now. The gates are open. Ships are coming in every day. And that's why I wanted to show you some of those pictures there. They're coming over with bundles on whatever it is. And we need help. And we understand that you're familiar with housing. I want you to get some housing experts. I want you to get some housing. And I said, I want you to know we have no money. We have no money. And I want you to come and help us with these people coming in at the port in Haifa. So I get hold of Lou Kahn, who was, I don't know if you know the name.
Architect.
Yeah, very famous architect and so forth.
You were connected to him?
No, had no connection with him at all. I was just looking for people that I thought would be helpful and willing to go and all. I got 7 people. I got Professor Griebler, professor of at Columbia University of economics, because I figured they said they had no money. We're going to have to figure some way, going to have to finance this thing. So I got him. Then I wanted somebody with government affairs, so I got, now I forget his name, what was with the U.S. government, plus another man that did the same job for the United States in Europe when the war was over there and they had to get housing and so forth. Those 2 were active there, so I got them. And then I knew that Dave Rose from New York, you know his son, Danny Rose. They're the largest owners of office buildings in New York and Boston and whatever. But Dave Rose at that time had just gotten started like a lot of Jews did in FHA, and they owned 100 houses or 200 apartments or whatever it is. That's how he had gotten started. But from that, they'd gotten very big, moved into other things. Right. So anyway, and I heard that I didn't know him, so I asked Dave Rose. Nobody turned me down. Nobody turned me down. So Dave Rose, so anyway, that adds up, I think, to 7 people. That was 7 people. And I'll show you the literature and news articles and whatever it is on. I have it in my file in the other room. You know. So now how do we get there? How do we get there? He wants us there right now. We're very, very busy, very, very busy on our construction jobs. And thank God I've always had good people running our business and all. So in 2 days or 3 days, we chartered we called it, what's the name of the French airline? Air France. So we got a plane from them called Air Chance. So we got an Air Chance. Now how do we get, you can't fly across how do we get? We flew to Gander, we flew to Iceland, we flew to Greenland, because it was a DC-6 that we got, and it has a 600-mile range, and longer range is 600. So we had to get 600-mile approaches to get there. But to Gander, to Iceland, to Greenland, to I think Rome or Paris and Athens. And he had his messenger meet us in Athens. Athens was blacked out at the time. Israel was blacked out. War was on. Israel was blacked out at the time.
When was this?
This was now early 49. The war was almost over. The war was almost over when these masses of people started to come. The war was almost over. There weren't too many were coming in right during the war. And one of the ships, I think you know, I have pictures of it, was sunk right in the bay right there. I have pictures of that ship because they wouldn't let it land. They just wouldn't let it land there. So they sunk it right there in the near Jerusalem, there in the ocean. So anyway, we got there. And the first thing, the next morning, we have a meeting set with Ben-Gurion. And the newspapers had articles, a cartoon of me with a T-square in my hand and so forth. The housing experts have arrived. The housing experts arrived. So, we have a meeting. Ben-Gurion at that time had an office in Tel Aviv. He had a little office there in Tel Aviv because things were still blacked out. You know, we meet with him and his staff, and he said, I want you to pay your respects to the American ambassador. It was Mikkel. The first one they had just appointed, the United States had appointed, and he said, I wanted him to know you are here and pay your respects, drop by his residence. And then he said, I'm giving you, see, there was 7 of us. I think only 2 cars. I think we had 2 cars, or maybe 3. because each car had somebody with a rifle, had one with a gun, and one was a driver. Because we were going now every place. The war wasn't over yet. Fighting was late, was still blocked out, and the fighting still going on. And he wanted us to cover the country, because he wasn't sure where he wanted places to be built. And his main thinking was defense. His main thinking was, how are we going to defend this country here, and where do we want to start building communities, and so forth. That's what's in his mind. So he said, and other people already who got on, like Levitt from Levittown, and the big New York builder, Zeckendorf, whatever, they all had ideas. They were going to come in and build things in Israel. But they had no idea that there wasn't any money available. And also what was more important, everybody said that you can't, the only answer will be the same as it was in Europe, and that was to order and send in immediately prefabs. The only way you're going to have to send prefabs into the country immediately to house these people coming in. Only way you'll be able to do it fast. And one on my own group who had headed this up in Europe said the same thing. It has to be. Lou Kahn and I to begin with, frankly, and I convinced Lou Kahn as an architect and all that was not the way to go. But people said Israel has no raw materials. There's no metals, there's no wood. They just have, the trees for the Jewish National Fund. There is no timber, there is no metal, there is no material to build housing with, so you're going to have to import them and all. And I said, having been in the construction business and having pioneered a lot of concepts of housing, said, you're absolutely dead wrong. You're absolutely dead wrong. They have everything they need to build up a housing for immediately, and not only that, an industry to build that can go on. Well, I said, and meantime, as I say, all these people are saying, bring in free. First of all, we had no money to buy. We would have had to buy them out of the United States, or somebody said out of Sweden or Norway. It was where they'd be making these prefabs, and you needed hard cash. They had no hard cash, and they had no way of getting it so far. So I said, that's not practical. They can't buy prefabs. And number two, we don't want any prefabs because there's nothing as permanent as a temporary house. And we didn't want, these people were coming out of quad sets and prefabs out of Europe and camps and all, so they were coming out of those. And they needed some privacy. And so not just to be in a, so we don't want any prefabs. We don't want any prefabs in Israel. We visualized Israel looking like Florida or California, that type of a climate and that type of an atmosphere. That's what we saw. So I said, we're not going to use any prefabs. So Ben-Gurion now said, what you do is you spend 1 week traveling the country. We're giving you a guard, we're giving you a chauffeur, and I want you to go through and there were no roads. In fact, if you see the pictures I took there was nothing. People don't really, oh my goodness. That's a housing project falling down.
I don't know what happened there.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
Somebody must have
So, and as I say, you even saw Palestinians who were still there, quite a few had not left. you know the story. They were told to leave, and they went and were told you're going to turn right around and come back and kill them all, kill off all the Jews and take everything. You know that story. Okay. It didn't happen. Thank God it didn't happen. So anyway, and then it was a matter of another article in the newspaper there. I couldn't read it. It's all in Hebrew, but people translated it. There's no housing for the housing experts. There was no place to put us. There was no place to put us. Well, that turned out to be a fun thing, because did you hear about the Katy Dan Hotel, where the Dan Hotel is now? There was a little hotel there called the Katy Dan, and there's been volumes of books written, because this is where all the flyers, and a lot of them were hired, as you know. A lot of the pilots and the fighter pilots were hired and they had a bar in the basement. It's 3 stories high, right on the beach, and right down from Golda Meir's apartment in Tel Aviv. So they found us 3 rooms or 4 rooms in the Katy Dan, where at nighttime all of the fighter pilots would come in to tell their stories. They go down in the bar. All reporters, all the international reporters, were staying there in the Katy Dan. So then we got put up in the Katy Dan, which was really quite an experience. And I and Lou Kahn, the architects, were roommates. We were roommates there, which was very important because we had a lot of planning to do. Out of the group, we were the ones really that was going to have to plan what's going to go, what would be built there. So we drove all around the country for a week. Stopped at half a dozen kibbutzim, all of which had sandbags all up to protect the children. The children, they left them there. They left them right in they didn't move them out. They kept them in. And the people that were in the particular kibbutz, was up to them, might be 200 people, whatever it is, to protect their kibbutz. That was the responsibility put on the kibbutzim, to protect them. And one of them that really was unnerving was Negba. Have you heard of Negba? It was right down with the whole Italian, yeah. Yeah, I think would be. The whole Italian, what am I thinking about? Am I getting it right? Who were not Italian. Well, the Egyptian, with the Egyptian encamped right a few miles in front of Negba, which is down in the
right in the south. Right.
Down in the south, because what you call it was still occupied. The capital there, the city, bigger.
Jerusalem?
No, down there.
Beersheba?
Beersheba, the sheik, whatever you call him, he didn't leave. He stayed. His harem was still there. We went inside. I could see the harem. I could see him upstairs, whatever it is. I went in there with the troops. We went in there with the troops, first into Beersheba and all, to see what deal. They had just made a deal days before now, taking it over, and the farthest south was Negba. And Negba was under siege. So we went into Negba, the 200 people, 5,000 to 10,000 troops from Egyptians right out in front of them, and they were never, and they were being bombarded every day while we were there. It was being bombarded. They never show you what cowards and how incompetent they are. They never were able to take Negba. A little kibbutz of 200 people, and being bombarded, never able. What kind of an army is it that can't take a little kibbutz of 200 people? And we stayed there overnight. So we were there in there while this was going on. We were in Negba. Okay, so now we come back. We've been gone a week. We come back to Tel Aviv and report back to Ben Gurion, and to show you the sense of humor they have. You know, he had that high hair that was up here, and he was wearing khakis at the time. And we come in there, and he's over there behind his desk in this little makeshift building in there. And he stands up behind the desk like this, and he puts out his arms, and he says, "New Isadore, where's the houses?" We'd come for houses, they wanted us to appreciate houses. Anyway, so, and I've got notes from him too, and part of his diary where he talks about interview. Somebody got me part of his diary. He kept a diary all the time, and somebody I've got found part of his diary talking about interview. So anyway, our story to him was that we could, for the people now who were piling into Haifa now, and it was raining too, it was raining at the time, were coming into the ships, and they were coming in with their bundles in Haifa and no place to put them. We had to do something about them quick, right now. So we got the U.S. Army something to send us tents, and also wooden floors along with them. And they we made a tent city right in Haifa to put these people into these tents and so forth. And some of them, there were several Arab villages that had been abandoned. There was nobody there at all. So we sent some of them. One ship had come in from Bulgaria, as I remember, from Bulgaria. And we sent the whole group over to a little Arab village that had been abandoned. There was nobody there. So they loved it over there. They really liked the accommodations over there. And also there was some facilities in what's the old city right near Jerusalem, near Tel Aviv there? Jaffa. There was some available that had been abandoned in Jaffa. So we sent some over to Jaffa. Some were in Jaffa, some were there, some were in the tent city. So this took the first immediate pressure off that they had right then. What are we going to do with them? What are we going to do with these people and their bundles and their children and so forth? And then we had to get down to now, what about some kind of a permanent housing? I said to him, it just so happens that reinforced concrete, which is a brand new item, people know, was only being discovered or used when I was in college. Now, concrete itself goes back to Roman times when there would be an eruption of a volcano and slag, which is molten lime is what it is, molten limestone, flows out into the fields where there's clay. When molten limestone mixes with clay, that's how you make cement. So the Romans had discovered that years before, and they used that. And then that forms a clinker. When it dries out, that forms a clinker. And when you grind up that clinker into a powder, that's cement. at cement. Now, of course, it's done in factories, and but that's the way. So they used that. The Romans used it on roads and buildings or whatever early on. But the problem with concrete, it has no strength in tension. It's good in compression. You can make an arch out of it. You can use it but if you take and try to make a beam or something out of it and you put a load on it, it'll crack. So it's just this century that the concept came of putting reinforcing rods to take the tension and the concrete to take the compression. In other words, if you were, let me give you, if this was a concrete beam, say, or slab, and this was just concrete, and it was like this, and you put a load on it, you can see the tension is in the bottom, you see. It's like here. So all you have to, so that would break. You couldn't use it for any kind, even over a door even, and all. So if you have to get reinforcing rods, and when you bend it now, the reinforcing takes the tension, the concrete is in the top, this is in compression, that's oversimplifying it, that's reinforced concrete. Reinforcing bars to take the tension, concrete to take the compression. Now you can go 100-story high with apartment building, or you can build a bridge or anything out of it if it's reinforced concrete. So, and that was a brand new item just being taught when I was in school. And my first partner, Albert Purball, who was 21 years older than I, was a Frenchman who was with a company that brought reinforced concrete from France to America as a patented item and so forth. So he and I formed a partnership. I had gone to work for the city because they were using reinforced concrete and they needed somebody who had just learned about it. So I worked for about a year for the city, and I met Albert Purball because they were building projects, designing projects. So we formed a partnership in 1928 of Purball and Millstone consulting engineers. And we immediately got most of the work all over the United States of high-rise buildings, because architectural firm didn't have in-house engineers understanding reinforced concrete. And reinforced concrete construction is much less expensive than structural steel or other, because they have to be fireproofed. They're not fireproof, whereas reinforced concrete is a fireproof material. So that's what we were started off doing before early on. So anyway, I said, you have every place I look at, every place, you've got limestone. There's limestone every place. I said, you even have a small cement plant in Haifa. There's even a small to start with. You'll need more cement, but to start with, you even have a small amount of that. Now, I said, your problem now is that you've got these people coming in and you're going to have to put them to work. You have to put these people to work. No, they have nothing to do. And making reinforced concrete is a very simple operation, because either you pour it flat to make a floor, or you pour it to make a footing, and all you will have to find money for will be some reinforcing steel, but a very small amount. We'll make everything basically in compression and have very little long spans for which they do today, but at that time we won't have any long span, but we'll need a little reinforcing for lintels or over whatever it would be. So that we'll have to get money for, which they did have. They had people who were making contributions. It was only a matter of who was going to get it. Everybody was fighting to get that money. So they agreed that they'd buy some reinforcing bars. They agreed that and all. So the next thing is, what are you going to make the walls out of? You make the walls out of concrete block. So all you need is some concrete block machines, and not big ones, small ones, because you got plenty of labor to be loading the sand and the water to make the blocks and all. And anybody can do that, and you can put them to work. And all you need is one little machine, smaller than an automobile, and you can put it anywhere you want to make. Any town, any place you want, you put it. And as long as you can shoving it, put in some crushed rock and some sand and water and cement, that's reinforced concrete. So you can make concrete blocks. Out of concrete blocks, you can will make the kind of buildings we want to look like. Later on, you can stucco them if you want to, but to begin with, you can even expose the concrete. So we'll start making, we'll use the cement from Nesher and start expanding the plant in Nesher. In the meantime, needless to say, we're having calls from little contractors that had been in Israel, all wanting to get into the act. They all wanted to get some business, and there wasn't any business, but there was going to be. So we had plenty of contractors and all anxious to supervise or to be selected for this kind of work. Also, all of their water pipe was steel pipe, and it was rusting away, and all. And water, and the first thing you needed before you had to was water. You had to get water to the community, or they built some towns later on and bought some prefabs, and then they couldn't even use them. They didn't even have water up to the town. So he said, and water pipe, is mostly today either clay or concrete. But it's not, we don't use steel pipes very often. You do for all. So we have to get pipes made, and we said, start a business making concrete pipes, because the first thing you're going to have to do to each one of these towns is to find a source of water and bring water. You don't necessarily have to have water in every house, but at least, if there's a house, at least there's a place where they can get water close by in jugs, or even for bathing are necessary. And you can't use the local waters because they're all salt waters. All the local water, they have big companies today that are desalinating, some of that's a big business, but you can't use it for this purpose. So anyway, we set up an industry. We made a design of the type of houses would be built, which are like typical small houses you'd see in California or Florida that would probably, well, I can't say about price today, but at that time would have been selling for maybe $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, whatever it would be. And this was the type thing. So now we had set up an industry, the Aryeh, in order to make work for these people to come in and to furnish housing, and then other buildings too, for the same time when you set the industry up. It almost in a few years after the state was formed, the Jews didn't want to do the construction work, and that turned it over to the Palestinians, who today do 90%. The problem right now, they can't come in for their jobs, because and the same thing happened with the kibbutzim the same way. The Jews didn't want to do farmers. They got into other businesses, as you know. In the kibbutz would get some other business. So most of the farming and most of the construction work today has been taken over by the Palestinians. That's their business. And their problem today is they can't get in to get to their jobs, which is a big job. But that's how the housing.
How long did you stay at that?
Stayed there until the first anniversary on May the 25th?
14 or
May what?
The English date is May 14th, but I don't know what
Whatever, I think it was, I think it was in May. We'd rise right after the first of the year, and we stayed until then.
To watch the parade.
And then that's when they were supposed to have the parade, and all the planes were flying over, and people were on the rooftops. It was bedlam, a bit of bedlam, and so forth. And that's when, what's his name, came into town, and
Weitzman?
who?
Chaim Weitzman? Or
Yeah, he was sitting right next to me on the platform up there on that day. So, okay.
Where did they build the? Which cities did they build these houses in?
Whichever new town was set up, and they were setting new towns up because Ben Gurion didn't want people staying around Tel Aviv or Haifa, because they had already, from where they came from, were begging. They were selling cigarettes, or they were begging and so forth around, and that's how they had been staying alive. And he didn't want them, so he started these towns, number one, for defense, and number two, for these people to go out and start inhabiting these towns. I forget which ones were started first, whatever it would be. And then the next thing that came up shortly after that was community centers. Here I was president of the World Federation of Community Centers, and I'm telling them, with you people here, you need community centers. And they laughed at me. They said, that's at the bottom of the top totem pole. I said, you're absolutely wrong. It's right at the top, and you'll find out the first thing that these people with different languages from different countries, and even in small places, and with schools, starting to build schools, and there at least we can use the schools for community centers too, so you're using them 24 hours a day, not like in this country where you can't have state and whatever it be. So I said, these people are going to have a place to get to know one another. They're going to have a place to, as I say, to learn languages, whatever they do. And sure enough, and we built the first one in Jerusalem. We built the first one, Katamon district or something in Jerusalem. I've got parents, the first one that we built. After that, we set up a program where YMCAs in the United States would put up money, and then then it was a matter of who was going to run them. One of the problems with the politics in Israel, each party wanted to control it. So we had to set up a control of how, and we got the Department of Education involved. So since then, we've built well over 100 community centers in Israel. So, you know Bill Kahn? Bill Kahn was head of the J in St. Louis. Then he became head of the Federation. Then he became head of the New York JC, and then head of their federation and all. Anyway, he called me the other day. I took him with me. On the next trip, I took Bill Kahn with me to visit some of the towns and school boards and department to set up community centers. And he called me the other day, he says, I want you to go with me to Israel. I said, Bill, I would love to, but I have a hard time even getting out of the house. I'd love to. So he says, get better and we'll go back to Israel and visit some of the people. Oh, and then another thing, at the Hebrew University, they interested me in, and I didn't realize how important it was in what's taking care of animals, what do you call it? Veterinary. So they interested me that, and I didn't realize it, how big, and even the pets, plus the domestic animals, cows, horses, whatever it would be, and that crosses borders. Any diseases and so isn't just in Israel. The same thing would be right across the borders and all. So they wanted to establish a school of veterinary medicine, and they established in Rehovot, and my wife and I gave them the money for the auditorium. So the auditorium for the School of Veterinary Medicine is also used by the agricultural, in Rehovot, is the Goldie and Isadore Millstone auditorium there. It's a lovely building there. We gave them the money for that.
Let me ask you, how did your involvement in Israel at that critical period of time in 1949, how did that impact the rest of your life or your relationship to Israel?
It impacted it, I would say, in a very major way. And a lot of it isn't necessarily in Israel itself. It's around the whole world, and also because of the involvement in the community centers. Now I feel, number one, that the Jews haven't lived 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years and still exist for no reason at all. They're here for a reason, they're here for a purpose. And their purpose, as far as I'm concerned, is basically justice. It is justice. There's so much cruelty, there's so much. And the mere principle of having, that's as good a word as any, I guess, whether it's in law, whether it's in families, whether it's whatever it would be, that principle to me is almost the message on Mount Sinai of you're a chosen people. You're chosen for what? You're a chosen people. And that has hurt us. You know, some people don't like the idea of a chosen people. But I accept that. I believe that. We're here for a purpose. And that purpose is justice, basically. And that covers so much territory of what's going on in the world today. You don't want to even watch TV. But to me, everything that's gone on at the J, and we've expanded now, and it's the J is the Millstone campus here. It's the Millstone campus. Is to this sense of justice and all, to me, is basic to the reason for having existed for this long and all, and sticking to that concept, whether it's through an Orthodox concept or whatever it is, that there's so little of it that truly exists in the world, that we are, as a people and as a small people, have tried to establish that as a way of life, and I think I see it being accepted now by younger people. I see younger people becoming more religious than they ever were. They send their children now to religious school. They study Hebrew at United Hebrew Temple, big Hebrew classes. They are all bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah now there. You would have thought that this third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation would have no interest, but they do have the interest. You believe me, more so than my generation. My generation was too interested in making a living, of going to college or something of that kind was their interest. Today, that's accepted. That's accepted. They're going to get an education when they want to, whatever it is. But they need more than that. And the only word, I think there's better words probably, is this feeling that there's so much injustice that it's up to us in any way that we can to try to implement that kind of a concept. I don't know how that idea strikes you or so, or whether it sounds naive or oversimplification, but basically that's the way I really look at it.
Does having been involved in Israel at its founding change the way that you relate to Israel today?
Yes, it does. It does, because I feel that they have every reason to be there. Just like my father-in-law, Mr. Gollin, said, someday there'll be a Jewish state and it'll be in Palestine. So I believe that it's something they are entitled to and is a part of their makeup, part of their very existence there. Somehow or other, why the world doesn't understand the justification of their being there and willing to take less and less land, because frankly they don't need a lot of land, I've learned. Because you see, Israel is never going to be really any bigger in population than it is today. Maybe a few, but not many. Now that's where my arithmetic comes in. My arithmetic tells me that there are about 12 million or 13 million Jews in the world today. 5 million or maybe 5.5 are in Israel. An equal number, five is in the United States. And there's 1.5 to 2 now remnants that are scattered, some in Europe, some in Australia, around the world, or in small groups. The state of Israel that grew from around 1 million, when I first went there, was only 1.5 million, that's all it was, got 1.5 million out of Russia. There aren't going to be any more out of Russia that are going to be wanting to go to Israel. Might be a handful here and there, and we're still, my grandson Bob goes and meets with groups of people there if they're interested. Either they will help them to become Jews, because they haven't been Jews, as you know, for 60, 70, 80 years. If they want to remain there as Jews, Bob, my grandson Bob, works with institutions that helps them remain there. And if they would like to emigrate, like to go, they are more than willing at means of bringing them to Israel. But when I analyze and in the meantime, our birth rate is not even reproducing ourselves. We as Jews, as you know, don't even have enough children to reproduce ourselves. Okay, so the number is not going to increase by reproduction.
Okay, can you pick up on that again? I'm going to change tapes. We actually ran through another tape. So.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
So anyway, with 13 million, let's call it, Jews in the world today, as I say, 5.5 million are in Israel, same way in the United States, and a couple million scattered around the rest of the world. These Jews, if you're going to look for a future Israel, if you're going to visualize what Israel is going to look like, I'm going to give you a picture of what it's going to look like, in my eyes and all. We know, number one, that if we permit some of the Arab countries to eliminate them because they get atomic bombs or something, you can't predict. I only hope that it doesn't happen, and I only hope that the world, as unreasonable as it is, and especially unreasonable as far as Israel is concerned, with their interests, because as you know, countries don't have friends. Countries have interests. And with the various interests in the world, Israel's at the bottom of the totem pole for China or India or any of them. as a unit of what they have they are, so that chapter, whether or not they would permit, whether the United States or with, what's the big, Iran,
Right.
with Iran with their threats and promises and so forth, really, I'm not too sure. It looks like it would be possible, and the world would not interfere. When you see countries like Russia today, the way they talk, they're even helping people who are helping to make their bomb or whatever they're trying to accomplish and so forth. So I can't say that couldn't happen. It would be a terrible tragedy if that happened, because in that case, Israel, that does have a time, would have to retaliate, and one way or another, there would be an awful lot of people killed, an awful lot of damage to the environment and so forth if that does happen. But sometimes when you watch the news and you read, you start to think that people are insane enough out there to do something of this kind over what? Believe like I'm believing. If you're not a Muslim, whatever it is, you deserve to die. I mean, it's hard to believe, but it seems that it's a possibility. Okay. And who's going to stop them and all? It's anybody's guess who might or might not, if that would happen. But I'm hoping that the world hasn't gone that insane that they wouldn't some way or other prevent such a terrible catastrophe. Because that would be not only for, that would be for everybody. It would be a terrible thing. Okay. Now just barring that, and that's something people are worrying about every day, as you know. That's something they're ignoring, you know. Okay. So getting back to the actual, as I have lived with it now for 50, 60, 70 years, as I see it in a realistic way. Out of the 5.5 million Jews in Israel, they now are entirely, almost entirely, an industrialized, a high-tech, highly educated group of people so far. And with great universities like Technikon and Hebrew University and the Weizmann Institute, great institutions there producing people who are entirely different than the ones that were there when I first went there. Okay. They are already, as you know, producing their own billionaires. They are already producing products that are being licensed out, whatever they are, whatever it is. So they're capable, if they're left alone, to enrich the entire Middle East if they would only accept them and let them. And they're perfectly willing to educate them. They're perfectly willing to invest with them. Whatever, if they would permit that, that would, of course, would be ideal. That would be a great Middle East. The Jews would be prominent in it. And some of them may not be Jews, by the way. There's some of them may not be Jews at that time. Okay, but whatever it is, that would be the ideal. I'm hoping that that could happen in some way or other. Jordan, the Palestinians, maybe even Syria they're talking about. And Israel is prepared, as you know, to give up everything. They give up the Golan, they give back everything for peace. But this time for real peace. Because the last peace 10 years ago, who was the prime minister? The one?
Rabin.
Who?
Yitzhak Rabin.
No, before Rabin. No.
With Begin?
Malcolm Begin?
Who?
Begin?
The one who's now head of the military.
Oh, with Barak?
Yes.
Okay.
Barak's concept, very frankly, I condemned and talked about as not working for one reason. They were taking for granted that they were dealing with, who was the head of Palestine at the time? Arafat, that they could make a deal. I was convinced they could not. and everything that they were offering on the West Bank or the Golan was going to weaken the position there, and they would never get a deal from Arafat. I never had confidence that they could ever get a deal with Arafat, and they never did. And the last excuse was there was a little piece of ground down by there that he wanted. They weren't giving him, so they'd given them everything anybody could hope for, so they didn't make a deal. In the meantime, they had weakened their position by having the West Bank and having other people closer in, whatever it would be, and there. So that concept, they were not dealing with anybody who was willing to make a deal. And until that time comes, they're never going to have a deal. They're going to try to defend themselves the best they can, but they're never going to have a deal. So in the meantime, they're smart, they're hardworking, they have developed this capacity of an education and so forth. So they're in a wonderful position to exist. But numerically, here are the facts. And this is actually an asset for them for what they are willing to give up. And I've discussed this with some of the leading people in Israel, and they agree with me that they would be willing to give up what I am going to tell you now. The population, it is not increasing there, and the most that they will ever get out of the United States or out of Europe or elsewhere might be another 100,000, 200,000. 3 at the most, and I can't even visualize where they would come from, because Israel today, with the danger of so forth, isn't that inviting as it was to the original pioneers and so forth. They're looking at these hard facts, because not too many people, unless they're just want to die there, which some did originally, wanted just to go to die there, you know. Some from St. Louis that I knew, grandparents went there to die. No, some of the Orthodox okay. So let's say that they increase it by 300, 400,000. In the meantime, they are also losing people. There are also Israelis living by the tens of thousands all around the world because they have the money to do it. They're still Israeli citizens and all, but they're not living in Israel, and they're still counted as citizens there. So, in my opinion, that is already, and if it increases, will be more that they lose than they gain. So now let's take for granted, if that is true, that there's going to be 5 million, 5.5 million there. Those 5.5 million want nothing to do with being carpenters, with being farmers, or working on a kibbutz. They are college-educated people who are interested in running their own firms, of becoming billionaires, or at least have a decent living for their family, and so forth. That is what they're there. So the plan of what Israel, if it comes down to what they will do to make peace, real peace I'm talking about, not like an Arafat peace, real peace, if they can sense this, and if there's somebody to guarantee it, and I don't know who that can be, whatever it will be, if they can do that, here's what Israel will look like. Water, as you know, is the most important item that they're all going to be fighting for. Israel, number one, wants to be a Jewish state. They don't want to be a democracy. You know, some people still think they should be a democracy. If it's a democracy, as you know, it won't be a Jewish state because they'll be outnumbered already by the Palestinians and Arabs who are reproducing at 5 and 6 and 8, and there's 1.2 million or so already citizens there. And on the right of return, they're insisting not the number they claim, but it'd be enough that within 10 years, at the rate they multiply and all, it would, if it was a democracy, it would not be a Jewish state. Would not be a Jewish. If it's a democracy and you have a vote, it's not going to be a Jewish. So that is not the answer. That is not. Some people, Jews still are, some of the very liberals and all think that they should be a democracy. They just don't understand that that means the end of a Jewish state. You have to understand that. As far as I'm concerned, that's not the answer. That's not going to be a Jewish state. Now, the only and realistic way that they can remain a Jewish state is, number one, they've already given up the, what they give?
Gaza.
What's that?
The
Gaza. They've already given up the West Bank, or if they haven't given up, the rest of it will be gone. The West Bank will be gone. In order to make a peace with that will involve maybe Syria or somebody else, they'll have to give up the Golan. Okay. Now you see how we're shrinking from what the original mandate was of what the Jewish state was supposed to be. If you look back, you see what you're getting down to. But in my opinion, they're never going to have that. That would never be enough a Jewish state. There aren't enough Jews really to populate that anyway. So now what they're planning to do, when you visualize these things gone, all you really have left, basically, is, and there'll even have to be some sort of a corridor between the West Bank and there'll even have to be a corridor of some kind there. So when you look at the problem of water, and you look at the amount of space that it takes for 5 million people, and 5 million people who are not carpenters and are not farmers and so forth, all it takes, and it would be adequate with their, would be basically Jerusalem, and you know the arguments about Jerusalem. That'll have to be solved one way or another. It won't be easy, but that's going to have to remain a Jewish, what concessions they can make, I can't think of. Basically, Jerusalem has to be part of a Jewish state. And the rest that they're already working on is now the area I told you around Beersheba and whatever it is. The Jewish National Fund already is working on water project and reuse and so forth, and becoming literally a living area for the Jewish people to live, mainly in that area. The only other Jews living in a Jewish Israel would be around Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and how much of East Jerusalem or West Jerusalem they might have to yield, I don't know. I hope a minimum, but it looks like probably some of that. Okay, when you take a look at that on the map, it doesn't look like very much left of the state. When you just look, oh, and there's also, by the way, the middle part, what do you call it, the Galilee.
Right.
The Galilee, which is a wonderful part of it, that's already occupied by the Palestinians now. That's where most of them live now.
Right.
1 million, 2 of them, and if there's any more that comes in. So that particular area, even though they are Israelis, and I'm assuming that they will want to remain in it. They may not want to remain in it, but I'm assuming they do want to remain in it. But if the other adjoining areas can become prosperous enough for them to make a good living there, they might even leave Israel and go there. If not, I'm depending that they would still be, and they are still part of this 5.5 million population, you know. Okay, so there, if the world would permit them to have a Jewish state with 5 million people in it, that would completely solve the problem of the Jews, because there aren't other Jews who want to go there. You know, maybe it's possible that if Jews have a bad time in the United States, that some might possibly want to go. But if they can be given that control of that much of the country, that is all the land that they need for the universities, for high-tech factory, high-tech productions, and so forth, to be a wonderful homeland for, and a Jewish state, a Jewish homeland and a Jewish state. If the world could agree to that, Israel would take it tomorrow. Israel would take it tomorrow and give up everything I've mentioned. Give up everything I mentioned. The West Bank, the Golan, give it all, if they could get that. Have you ever thought of it in that way?
The big question is whether the world could agree.
Will the world agree? Okay, so tell me, why shouldn't the world agree? Just tell me one reason or any, why shouldn't the world agree? You look at the whole map, you look at,
I'm not
and
saying-
you look at a tiny area.
I'm not
Why
saying-
then, why would the world agree?
You said before that not these things aren't always rational. It's not always, even if it seems to make sense, it doesn't always mean that the world or that the United Nations or that whoever it might be will make the right choice. So I think
So if that's the case, what are they saying? They don't agree to that, what are they saying? That we don't want the Jews to exist?
I don't think anybody's presenting a better plan necessarily. I just think that people that, you know, the question is whether the nations of the world are willing to accept. And
In other words, when you say the nations of the world really don't care, it doesn't
Right.
make any difference to them. That what you're really saying, are they willing to satisfy some lunatics who are Muslims who we say we want Jews exterminated? That's what you're saying then.
right.
They're saying the Jews, we don't want that, we want them exterminated.
Well,
Now that may be the two extremes. One may be what I just suggested as a viable, productive Jewish state in that part of the world. And if the clergy or whoever predominates, lunatics, whoever it is to say, we don't want them, period. And they gain the capability of accomplishing that. And then what you're saying is Russia, China, United States, Europe, England would just let it happen.
well, let's see what the world does about Iran.
What's that?
Let's see what the world does about Iran. That's the test. We'll see what happens. Whether the world does anything about Iran or not.
Well, very frankly, I don't think anything would be accomplished by it, but the Israelis are realistic enough to know that some people are even predicting or saying that they are going to be the first to make a preemptive attack in order to exist. But I don't think that would accomplish anything. Wouldn't accomplish anything. To make a preemptive attack, I don't think it would accomplish anything.
Well,
They may do it.
I don't know.
The U.S. would let that happen. I really don't.
They may do it. You think there's a possibility they might do it?
Israel?
Yeah.
Yes.
You do.
I guess there is.
Okay, you're an Israeli there. You're living there. And they make a preemptive attack. What is it going to accomplish?
Well, it may, I don't know, it may accomplish, if they're successful, then it destroys the threat of nuclear Iran.
Oh, no. No, that's not the way it doesn't work that way. You don't destroy them that way. That's not the way. And also you create contamination. It's so close by. You contaminate the air, the atmosphere, whatever.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they're, I don't know how many, I don't know how many choices they're gonna have. Unless somebody else comes ahead and does something. Or they
You mean
just,
to Iran, other than Israel?
or they just say, well, we're prepared to see. Maybe Iran will have a bomb, and maybe they won't use it. I don't know.
So in your opinion, being an Israeli and living there today, and I with 50, 60, 70 family who live there and all, and you're living with that every day, you can't think about it. I mean, you can't be thinking about something like that. You got to think you're going to be there forever,
Right.
ever. God will provide.
I don't know. My 6-year-old son asked me what's going to happen. And I told him it would be okay.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I was looking and thinking about what's going on and what's being demanded and what they conceivably would you be willing, by the way, as Israeli, to give up what I mentioned about giving up in order to accomplish peace?
Real peace?
Yeah, oh yes, I'm only talking about real peace. I'm not talking about that on a temporary basis. No, real peace.
I don't know. I think that most Israelis would.
What's that?
I think that most Israelis would.
Israelis what?
I think most Israelis would be willing. to
I
give
would
that
think
up.
so.
I think that you are correct.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so. What would they really be losing by it? Other than those that look back to a ultra orthodox or look back to a biblical, this is holy land, this is holy. Aside from that, what basically would they be giving up at all? Well, that they need now and is of importance. What would they be giving up? What are they giving up?
I mean, I think that it's a lot of it is based on the question of whether you think that the other side is going to deliver the real peace. And I think that most Israelis are very skeptical. But I think that in the sense that if they could become convinced that it would be a real peace,
Yes.
then every time it's been raised for a question, Israel has been willing to give up, when even it was a hope for peace. So I think that if there was a way to guarantee that it was for real, I think that most Israelis would do it. But I think that Israelis have become more and more skeptical, and that's why.
Well, then I would agree with that. If they were skeptical and figured that it wasn't going to happen, then it's like I told you before with
Arafat.
Arafat, that I was against. I was against giving up anything.
Right.
Why give up anything if you're not going to really get anything in return,
Right.
and you're already giving up and getting them closer to you for defense and so forth. So then I absolutely would say no. Well,
Well, this has been
Wow.
I think this has been very meaningful and fascinating, and I thank you very much for all the time, and really appreciate it.
Okay. Here is 19. Now, the amount of money in here is not correct. I'll tell you what it's about here. 19. This is about setting up the
scholarship.
See, along with the cash that he gave at that time, and in the bottom of the depression, you can multiply that by about 30. He gave 8 parcels of real estate. You know, really. So he gave the real estate also. Right. And talking about here, this is 1925, and then you see what's going on. You asked about.
Mm-hmm.
This was just a dinner that was given in honor, as I said, of Mr. Gollin. Here's
I understand you.
Here's an article in the Jewish Record. This is
What's the date?
1940.
Where's the date?
This
Right there in
is
the corner. Is it? Let me just gotta get up on it. Can I turn that up so I can see it? What's the date that's on there?
here's something about non-golden too.
Mm-hmm. It's an old Jewish record, right?
He was one of our first students.
No kidding.
Yeah,
I worked at the Israeli consulate in New York.
yeah.
I was the director, I worked in the Office of Academic Affairs. So we worked as the representatives of the Israeli. Yeah,
And
37.
then he came back and became a professor. I've got a number of his books
Uh-huh.
that he wrote here.
Get on the tape. That's pretty amazing.